Hi, welcome to Christopher's Cucina. I'm super excited to have you in my kitchen today. We'll be diving into the world of everything chicken with emphasis on seasoning and technique. Let's get right into it. And now we're gonna get started on the chicken parm. One of my favorite dishes. Chicken breast. We take regular chicken breast here and pound it down, pound them thin. All right, you should almost be able to read through them a little bit by way of how thin they are. If you have a few holes in the chicken, it's perfectly okay. It's not gonna make a difference at the end. What we wanna do here is season the chicken well. Seasoning, what we mean by seasoning is kosher salt, ground black pepper. Kosher salt's ideal, it's coarse. You can feel it in your fingertips. You can get an idea of how it's going. I like to season from up high. By doing that, it allows for an even layer of seasoning rather than going right down close and seasoning in a small spot. You want the seasoning to be even throughout. You also want to season both sides of the chicken. This chicken's very thin, so we don't have to over season both sides. You want to season both sides of the chicken. Ground black pepper out of a pepper mill is always ideal. If you don't have a pepper mill and you have ground black pepper, it'll work perfectly fine for you. Now we want to bread the chicken. By breading the chicken, it's a standard breading. In the culinary world, it's called SOP, a standard operating procedure, where it's flour, beaten egg, and breadcrumb, in that order. I do want to season the breading as well. The flour gets a little bit of seasoning as well as the breadcrumb. In the breadcrumb, we'll take it a step further. We're going to add a little bit of grated Parmesan cheese to that, as well as a little bit of chopped parsley. Both are optional, both not necessary. Both do add a nice layer of a level of flavor that would be missing if it was otherwise not there. The parsley also acts as a color agent, so when in the next step, when the chicken gets breaded and we go to the pan with it, you're gonna see the parsley at the end kind of pop a little bit on the chicken by way of color. Standard breading. Flour, egg, breadcrumb. Take the chicken, both sides into the flour. What's important here is to shake off the excess flour. The idea of the flour is so that the egg sticks. The idea of the egg is so the breadcrumb sticks. You don't want to be heavy on any of these layers here, okay? You want the egg to completely drip off of the chicken and then go into the breadcrumb. And I would repeat this the same way until all the chicken is breaded. Flour, egg, back into the breadcrumb. What's important as well is that the egg is very well beaten. You don't want to have pieces of white not mixed into the egg yolk. When you beat the eggs, add a little bit of water. It'll lighten that whole mixture up for you, and it'll allow the egg not to adhere quite so much to the flour. Shaking off the excess flour, back into the egg. Shaking off the flour, back into the egg, both sides. And then flipping the chicken into the breadcrumbs on both sides. Pressing them in and pressing them in. Very simple procedure here. And I'll just leave the chicken on that side of the breadcrumbs from there, and then I'll do the other two pieces. Chicken in from the egg into the seasoned breadcrumbs, both sides, shaking off any excess breadcrumb because we don't want it too heavy. If the egg wasn't thinned out with a little bit of water, the egg would be very thick and heavy, thus adding, once we go into the breadcrumbs, adding a heavier layer that we're not otherwise looking for. Now that the chicken's breaded, I'm gonna go wash my hands. Very important to wash your hands. Okay, now that our chicken's out of the breadcrumbs, we can take them out and put them onto a plate. Now that the breadcrumbs are actually on the outside of the chicken, there is much less of a risk of any cross-contamination by way of touching the raw chicken, so you don't necessarily have to go back and wash your hands with soap and water in that case because the outside of the chicken is covered. So we have our chicken here. You can see the parsley flakes adhere to the chicken as well. And we can remove our breading station. Chicken Parmesan, one of those great classic dishes. Very simple, very few ingredients. Tomato sauce, the chicken, some mozzarella cheese, some Parmesan cheese, and then a little bit of herb for garnish and for flavor as well. When it comes to cooking the chicken, you want to preheat your pan always. You never want to put oil into a cold pan and then heat up your pan from cold. The idea is to heat up your pan, add your oil, figure out how hot your temperature is, and then go through and cook the chicken. We want to cook the chicken over medium to medium-low heat. Too high of a heat will brown the outside of the chicken too fast. We don't necessarily have to cook the chicken all the way through right now because we're going to finish it in the oven. But we don't want to brown it so fast and rapidly that the oil would tend to get too dark and a little bit bitter if you have it over too high of a heat. So the pan's over medium heat. I use extra virgin olive oil. In this case, you certainly don't have to. The flavor of the extra virgin olive oil really penetrates well to the end product. The type of oil that you use will dictate the flavor of the chicken as it's cooking. Extra virgin olive oil tends to be far more expensive than regular olive oil. In the event you don't have extra virgin olive oil or don't want to get it, any sort of a mild neutral oil will work, including a vegetable oil or a canola oil. I'm shaking the pan in this manner here. What that does is, as a chef, we look for the way the oil reacts in the pan, okay? That gives us an idea of how hot that temperature is. We can put our hand over it, but we want to be careful doing that in case there's any sort of a splatter. Another way to check the chicken and the temperature of the pan is to simply take some of these dry breadcrumbs from the breading procedure and you put a little bit in the pan like that. You can see that they're naturally starting to bubble up and brown here. All right, that tells us if those breadcrumbs became too brown right away, that means our pan's too hot. In the event the breadcrumbs went in there and didn't do anything, they just kind of stayed there, that means the oil's not hot enough and we would want to allow that to heat up a little bit. I feel good about the temperature of the oil here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to place the chicken in the oil. Couple things to note here. Anytime you're putting something in the hot oil, you always want to put it in and drop it away from you. Okay, rather than have something drop and splatter towards you, if something's going to splatter, you want it to splatter away from you to avoid any sort of potential accident or burn, quite frankly. So here's how you do that. You take the chicken, you drop it away from you. Again, take the chicken into the hot oil, drop it away from you. You can do it with your fingertips. If you're not quite comfortable doing it with your fingers, you can take a pair of tweezers. We, in the culinary world, like to use tweezers. Tongs work just as well, where you can pick up the chicken and you can drop it in just like that. So now as the chicken's cooking, we want to make sure our oven's preheated in the meantime. So we have an oven set at 375 degrees. That's a convection oven. If you happen to have a regular standard conventional oven with no fan in there, I would suggest maybe 400 degrees on that. 375 to 400 degrees is perfectly fine on this. So the chicken's cooking over medium heat. 3 minutes per side will get you a nice brown color on this. We're simply looking to get a brown color and a crispy texture rather than overly concern ourselves with cooking the chicken at this point. Because the chicken's so thin, there's no concern of the chicken not being cooked once it comes out of the oven. The oven will certainly get us to where we need to be with the chicken being cooked. You'll notice me moving the pan around gradually. And what that does is it's ensure that nothing's sticking, that there's enough oil that's in the chicken. The amount of oil is important too. How much oil do we use? Well, this is called a shallow fry, meaning that a deep fry would be about a third of the way up of this pan, full of hot oil, chicken goes in, it's fully submerged, and that's known as a deep fry. In this case, this is a pan fry or a shallow fry, where there's just enough oil on the bottom of the pan where nothing's dry, but nothing's overly there's not a ton of oil in here to have this really bubble up. It's just enough so it absorbs a little bit into the breadcrumb, and that's where the extra virgin olive oil comes into play. The flavor of the oil is going to penetrate into whatever you're cooking at this point. Because extra virgin olive oil has such a deep, rich flavor, I like it in stuff like in items like this. In the event you don't have the extra virgin olive oil, regular vegetable oil, canola oil works perfectly fine, grapeseed oil, anything that's considered a neutral oil. One thing about extra virgin olive oil that a lot of chefs may say, the reason why we don't fry in extra virgin olive oil is because it doesn't have as high of a smoke point as other oils do. For example, canola oil, vegetable oil, for example, peanut oil has even a hotter smoke point. You can cook those up to 450 degrees and not have too much trouble. Extra virgin olive oil, anything over 400 degrees tends to break down the olive oil, and it could add a little bit of a bitter quality. So after about 3 minutes, again, I'm keep swirling the pan. The chicken's browning nicely. Tomato sauce is warm on the side. The oven is preheating in the background. You always want to have a pan ready for you for once you're done with the chicken, you want to have somewhere to put it. So you want to have a pan ready to go before your chicken's ready. What'll happen is if you're not sure what you're going to put your chicken in, your chicken gets done, you may not be sure what to do with it. The chicken may stay in the pan too long. It may accidentally overcook. It may burn. So it's a matter of preparation. Everything is, the key to cooking is about being prepared, thinking ahead. It's easy for a trained chef because we think that way. Okay, for somebody at home, it doesn't come near as easy. So the idea of joining me through this series is, the idea of sharing these techniques with you is because I want to make this as easy for you to at home to learn the craft and be comfortable in the kitchen. Cooking can seem like a chore. Always have your pan ready so when your chicken's done, you have somewhere to go with it. By joining me in this journey through this show is I want to share with you the idea of cooking at home to make it as pain-free as possible, if that makes sense, and as easy for you as possible. When anything becomes a chore, we're less inclined to want to do it. When something's fun and we can make and have fun doing it and have it not be so much work, we're more inclined to cook at home. You'll save some money by not eating out as much, and you'll ultimately feel better about cooking your own food, in my opinion. Now, chicken's been cooking for about 3 minutes on both sides. I feel pretty confident that the chicken's cooked at this point, but again, that's less relevant. We were just looking for a nice brown, even color. Now chicken, taking a pair of tongs or a pair of tweezers, straight out of the pan, right onto our baking pan. This baking pan happens to be lined with foil. Certainly doesn't need to. If you had a non-stick pan, you may simply put it right on the pan. Even if you have a non-stick pan now, I would encourage you to use a piece of tin foil, a piece of parchment paper would work. That'll allow for an easier cleanup at the end. One of the reasons why people are apprehensive to cook in general at home is because not only are they a little bit unsure of how to cook, right, and the technique of how to physically make something, it can be daunting because we accumulate so many dishes. So then that's where the work becomes. So the goal here is to have something lined with foil or paper, and then once it's baked, you remove it, you put it on your plate, and then you can simply remove the foil or the paper and your cleanup is exponentially easier. Pan's off now that the oil is done. All right, so you allow the oil to cool in the pan. Before you do anything with this oil, allow it to cool in the pan. 25-30 minutes is a good rule. And then you can pour that into another container to get rid of it at that point. But you want to be careful pouring hot oil into a container right away, in particular if it's a container that could melt or you could accidentally burn yourself. Now back to the chicken. We have our tomato sauce that's been cooking away, and it's simply warm. Now we're going to finish the chicken parmesan. Chicken's cooked and on the pan. I'm going to put it in front of me. We're going to take a little bit of our tomato sauce and we're going to cover the chicken. The amount of sauce is entirely up to you. Keep in mind that if you only put a very little bit amount of sauce on here and then you bake it in the oven, it's going to absorb straight right into the breadcrumbs. If you add a little bit more sauce than you think you need, it'll account for some of it absorbing into the breadcrumbs and leaving you a little bit of sauce on the end, at the end as well. You may also, I would also encourage you to have some extra sauce on the side to always add. You can always go back and add some more sauce once you've plated up if you need. Directly onto the chicken. I'm not worried about overspill on here as well, okay? You have the ability to put a sauce on the bottom if you like. I find that the sauce on the bottom tends to make this a little bit more soggy than what we're looking for. I do find that it holds a little bit more crisp on the bottom of the chicken by simply saucing the top only. Again, it's all subjective. There's really no right and wrong here with cooking in general in my philosophy. It's a matter of interpretation. What's right for me may not be right for the next chef. However, everything that I'm going to show you and everything that you see in this episode is tried and tested, and I stand by 100% what I'm doing as it relates to any of the food that you're seeing in the episode. So the brown chicken's on the pan, tomato sauce is on top. We have a few options here. There's some more Parmesan cheese that'll go on. A little bit more parsley will go on, as well as some sliced mozzarella. I like whole milk mozzarella. You can grate it, you can shred it, you can slice it. It really doesn't make a difference. It's a matter of preference. I prefer whole milk mozzarella to part skim. It's got a richer flavor to it. It has a better milk quality to me. If all you have is part skim or you can't find whole milk, please don't let that slow you down. The part skim will work just fine. A little bit of Parmesan directly onto the chicken, on top of the sauce. And then a slice of mozzarella on each one. Sometimes it may take two, depending upon how big your chicken is cut. The amount of cheese is entirely up to you. And I like to take a little bit of parsley and put it on top of the cheese before it melts. Certainly don't have to. What this does is, as this melts, that parsley is going to bake right into that chicken and give you a nice color and a nice texture, because that's what you're going to see on the final plate. We don't want to cover this completely in sauce at this point, so that parsley is going to have a nice eye appeal once it's on the plate. Chicken's been browned on both sides, seasoned, breaded, browned on both sides, cooked in hot olive oil, added to the pan, covered in tomato sauce, Parmesan cheese, sliced mozzarella, and a little bit of parsley. At this point, this chicken can go directly into the oven. The only thing we want to accomplish in the oven at this point is to simply heat this through. As I stated, the chicken, as it's cooking into the pan, because it's so thin, is cooked through at this point. I can guarantee it. So all we're looking to do now is simply melt the cheese. How long does this take in the oven? Well, depending upon how hot your oven is, if you have the fan in the oven, or if you have a convection oven like we have here, or if you have a conventional oven at home without a fan, this is going to take 5 to 7 minutes in the oven. If you have an oven that doesn't have a fan in it, that's called a conventional oven, I would say closer to 10 minutes. Keep a light on it if you need, and once that cheese is melted, your dish is complete. So now we go into the oven and let the oven do the rest of the work. And we're back. The chicken has since come out of the oven. 7 minutes in this oven. Cheese is melted ever so slightly, just enough to cover the chicken, and now we can plate. Right tool for the right job. This is a spatula. This one moves. I like it for something like this. We want to put under the chicken and shingle it in our pan. This would be considered a family style dish where we put multiple pieces of chicken on one dish. I like to shingle that down as like such. Shingle, clean it up for presentation. And to finish the dish, a little bit of extra virgin olive oil that we cooked it in, more grated Parmesan cheese, a little bit, garnish right on top. If you have the olive oil in a bottle, that works well. Otherwise, just a spoon. A little bit of fresh, raw, extra virgin olive oil on top. Again, that's for flavor. And a basil garnish. In this case, just to set it off. And here you have it, the final dish, chicken Parmesan with a little bit of basil. Enjoy. It was a joy having you in my kitchen today. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Christopher's Cucina. You may follow me on Instagram at Christopher's Cucina.